Hello, dear audience. Today we're going to be reading Fear Garden, a IDFB fanfic. We're going to be reading the chapter Pluck and Snap. It has been written by Icemint Freeze. It is accessible on the website wattpad.com with a double T. Everyone quickly began to scatter as knives began to fly through the air. The others quickly sprinted around and behind trees to help avoid the knives from stabbing at them. But some saw this as an opportunity to catch her and make her pay for the sins she had brought upon the land. Now, who were they again? Woody? Rocky? My two dear acquaintances. Leafy stepped out of the darkness, twirling a blade in her hand. Her eye gleamed with anger as she looked up, her hand now clenching the knife. Murdered and thrown away. Just like that. She flung the knife forward, where it aimed towards someone who was trying to flee. Coiny. He quickly ducked as he heard the blade hurl past him, before he stood up and turned around. "Why are you doing this?" His voice nearly cracked, genuine anger coming from it. Leafy scoffed, before she took out another knife, twirling it in her hands just like before. "You are all so pathetic. More so than you used to be," she chuckled. "But more dumb. You all think I would do something like this?" Coiny slowly began to approach her, his fists clenched and his eyes fixated on her. "What are you saying?" "Sure, I'd love to see you all die, but do you think I'd be the ones killing you? You think I killed Woody, Rocky, or Her voice trailed off, before she could even finish saying his name. Her eyes began to glimmer with tears for a moment, as she clenched the knife. Quinny paused. He'd never seen her like this. Well, not for a while. She looked up, as a small tear escaped her eye and began to trickle down her cheek. Her eyes shined, a small tint of green glowing from her pupils. "I never even..." She looked down, feeling more tears spill out of her eyes. Courtney felt a wave of sympathy drown him out as he continued to approach the leaf. "You too, huh?" Leafy's eyes widened as her head shot up to look at him. He had a sad smile on his face as he now stood a few feet away from her. Her head tilted towards the side as the green began to outshine the dull gray color in her eyes. "What? I know how you feel," he sighed out. "When you want to apologize to someone for the stuff you've done, only to realize that they're gone." Leafy's lip trembled as a sob began to bubble up her throat. Quinny looked down, a heavy silence hanging over the two. That is, until the sound of metal hitting the bark of a tree broke it. Quinny looked up to see Leafy holding the knife, which was now stabbed into the tree, as she sobbed silently. Coiny shook his head. "I'm sure he missed you. He just..." A sudden yell made Coiny jump. "Ah, whatever." Leafy forcefully yanked the knife out, wiping her eyes. She turned back towards him, her eyes losing its bright green color and returning to the emotionless gray shade that they once were. "All I want now is to see all of you die. I don't care anymore." Before Coiny could even react, she swiftly took out a knife and hurled it towards him. He quickly ducked, but yelled out in pain as he felt the knife slice past his head. He put a hand on his head as he looked up. "You think you can..." She was gone. Coiny's eyes widened as he quickly stumbled away, trying to look around for any familiar face or any sign of help. Luckily, they weren't very far. "Where did he go?" "Don't tell me he went after her. He's gonna get himself killed." "Who cares? He's probably dead by now. We have to run." Coiny winced as he felt a warm liquid slowly trickle down the side of his head. Blood. He carefully made his way towards the group, his head stinging, as he let out pained grunts and breaths. It was only a matter of seconds before someone noticed him, which, in this case, was Gelatin. "What happened to you?" He blurted out, quickly running over towards him. Coiny waved him off, covering his gash. I'm, I'm fine, Gelatin, he muttered, as he held the gash. Blood was pouring out, as he could feel himself growing weaker. Golf Ball rushed up towards him, and yanked him down to her level. He crowed down in surprise, as she began to inspect the open wound that was on his head. She sucked teeth before looking down at Coiny. You'll be fine. She let him go, causing him to stumble back. Thankfully, it wasn't that deep. A few bandages and some disinfectant will do. She turned back towards Tennis Ball, who nodded. Coiny grunted as he leaned on a tree. Then, why am I so dizzy? He put a hand on his head. Tennis Ball walked up to him and inspected him closely. Probably the anxiety of the moment? Or the bleeding? He paused, looking back up at the bleeding cut on his head. But it'll go away. Let's just take care of that wound first. He shot a glance towards Golf Ball, who nodded in agreement. Tennis Ball then looked back at the others. Let's get everyone out of here. We need to get Coiny taken care of. A needle can show Teardrop around. Maybe find her a house to live at. He winked. Needle rolled her eyes playfully as Teardrop grinned, kneading on Needle's side. Free Smart, let's head back. Let's make sure Ruby and Book are all right, Pencil ordered. The others nodded, as they began to walk out of the forest, making their way back into the city. Fries dusted himself off and looked up. I'm gonna go back to the garden. Make sure to check up on Pin later. I saw her head back early, Fries told Coiny. He nodded before Golf Ball stomped up towards him suspiciously. What do you mean? Where did Pin go? She raised an eyebrow as she questioned the taller object. Fries rolled his eyes before slightly pushing her out of the way. Relax, will you? She went home. She wasn't feeling well, from what I heard. Fries glanced up at Coiny, who nodded. Yeah, she just went home. Get your head out of the clouds, GB, he uttered dizzily. Golf Ball sighed. All right. Let's just head back. I'm beat. Agreed. A few days later. Buck? What is it now, Pencil? Where's Flower? Buck angrily glanced over at Pencil, who was staring out of the window. Pencil, knock it off, she mumbled angrily. Pencil looked back at her, her hand shooting up in confusion. What? What did I say? Buck pointed towards the door, which was the door that belonged to Ruby's room. Pencil mumbled angrily, before she marched over and grabbed Book's wrist, yanking her out of her chair. She marched over towards the window, while Book was struggling to get free from her grip. Pencil, Pencil, let go of me, she protested. Just look! I'm not giving in to another one of your stupid... Book suddenly went silent, as she glanced outside. A large, gaping hole was buried into the ground, as a pile of fresh dirt laid next to it. Book's heart dropped as she felt panic creep up her back. Pencil, put her back, she gritted through her teeth. Pencil scoffed as she looked down at her. You seriously think we did this? She mumbled. She shook her head as she looked back up. Just go check up on Ruby. I think I have to go talk to Golf Ball about this. She sighed as she began to walk out of the kitchen. Book nodded as she began to head towards the door. She held her hand up towards it, but paused as she heard a noise come from the closed room. She leaned in and began to listen. Soft sobs and whimpers broke the silence in the room as the doll gem looked down at the photograph in her hands. The photo was glossy and clean, taken a long time back, while everything and everyone was feeling fresh and new. She had taken good care of the photo, since it was a token to her. The photo was of herself and Flower, back when the two had just got together. The photo had Ruby in Flower's arms, Ruby grinning and sticking her tongue out playfully. Flower rested her head on Ruby, a beautiful, genuine smile glowing on her bright face. Her eyes were a bit shy, yet filled with the joy and love she had felt towards her small girlfriend. Ruby whimpered as she slowly rubbed her thumb over flour, feeling the glossy paper on her skin. I remember how soft you felt. Ruby giggled out weakly as she continued to rub the photo. You were so beautiful, she paused. So beautiful. Ruby let out a quiet sob as she hugged the photo and sulked into her sheets. What she didn't expect to hear was a knock on the door. Ruby? Ruby froze up. Book. Ruby slowly peeked out of her sheets, staring at the door. Another knock echoed through the room before Book sighed. If you need anything, just let me know. Ruby hesitated before she spoke out. Book? Her eyes widened as she put a hand on her throat. Her voice was scratchy and hoarse, weakened from all the weeping she had done. The door opened as Book looked over towards the bed. Yes, Ruby? Ruby felt a warmth bloom in her chest. Book's voice filled her with a feeling of safety and comfort, and for some reason her mind went blank. She was no longer feeling despair. Book walked closer towards her, raising her eyebrow in curiosity. Was she okay? Do you need anything? Food, water? She suggested, smiling in sympathy. Ruby simply stared at her, her eyes darkened and dull, and red from all the tears she had let out. Book felt her smile falter a bit. I'll just get... Suddenly, Ruby quickly tossed her arms round Book, hugging her close. Her eyes stung with tears as she felt Book's arms softly wrap around her, as she held her in her arms. Ruby let out a shaky sigh, as Book stroked her back gently. I know, Book whispered. Ruby buried her face in Book's chest, making Book hug her closer. Ruby no longer cried. She simply closed her eyes and sank into Book's arms. Book whispered comforting words towards her as she continued to rub her back. The photo was still in her hand, still shining, and with Ruby's thumb on flour. Pin scrambled around, grabbing jumbled up piles of blankets and pillows. She quickly brought them all into a room as she dumped them onto the bed. Quinny looked up at her, smiling nervously. Pin, you really don't have to. Hush! She shouted, as she quickly fixed the sheets over him and softened the pillows. Quinny sighed as she dusted herself off. How are you feeling? A nervous tone flooded her voice as she held Quinny's hand. He shrugged a bit, looking down at her hand. I'm fine. Really, I'm fine. He smiled a bit. Pin kissed his cheek as she wrapped her arm around him. Ever since he returned with a large gash on his head, Pin has quickly cared for him, helping him clean up and bandage his wound, as well as confining him to bed, rest, until he's feeling better once again. Quinny kept denying, but she still continued to help. You worry too much, Quinny frowned. Pin sighed as her arm loosened around him. I'm sorry, she whispered. No, Pin, it's all right. He quickly held her hand and gave it a gentle squeeze. Thank you for caring for me. Really, but take a moment to look after yourself. Pin thought for a moment before looking down at her hands. Bloodied. Flower's hand. Flower's body. Garden. Beautiful. Pin put a hand on her head dizzily. Not again, she mumbled quietly. Quinny quickly sat up, holding her hand closer to his chest. What's wrong? Are you okay? He asked. Pin shook her head, beads of ooze forming on her forehead. I'm fine, she paused. Need a moment. She turned back towards him, her eyes now dim and filled with exhaustion. I'm gonna go get some more berries for tea. I'll let Needle know to check up on you, she quietly uttered. Quinny nodded in understandment. That's fine. Just be careful, please. He pointed towards his wound. Pin scoffed. Please, Quinny. I think I can manage. I'm the Woe Bunch captain, after all. A grin spread across her cheeks as she swiftly grabbed a basket and left the room. Quinny chuckled a bit as he began to look around the room. Pin's room was always kept neat and tidy, but recently it's been getting a bit disorganized. He continued to look until... What was that paper on Pin's desk? Needy! Pin cried out. Needle's eyes darkened as she turned and quickly slapped Pin across the face. Don't call me Needy! Needle yelled. Teardrop, who was beside her, crossed her arms in annoyance. Pin rubbed her cheek dizzily before looking up at the taller object. Needle, do you mind watching Coiny for a bit while I head out to get a few oil berries? I want to make some tea for him and I, Pin explained, a blush slowly growing on her face. Needle smirked playfully. Oh, really? It is no N-word November.
Gonna do it, Star Trek.